The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Well, Donald Trump really needs some kind of accomplishment in his presidency, or at least something that he could realistically call an accomplishment since becoming president of the United States. And if you went only by some of the excited headlines on right-wing media yesterday, you might have thought that Donald Trump got a legislative accomplishment. The travel ban version 3. We had travel ban version 1, which failed, travel ban version 2, which failed. And if you understood the headlines yesterday to mean that the Supreme Court says travel ban version 3 is on, then you might have thought that Donald Trump got that legislative accomplishment. But he didn't, because what the Supreme Court did yesterday is say that the travel ban can be in force while lower courts hear legal challenges. And that is the key phrase, pending legal challenges. The Supreme Court yesterday ruled that Donald Trump's ban on travelers from 6 majority Muslim countries can go into full effect pending legal challenges. Trump now has what sounds like an accomplishment to some people, but it is really not, because the Supreme Court said nothing yesterday about whether the travel ban is legal. What the Supreme Court said yesterday is merely the travel ban can be on while the lower courts start to sort out the legality. They stopped the preliminary injunction period. Nothing was said by the Supreme Court about the underlying constitutionality of the content of the travel ban. Nothing was said about the legality of the travel ban. All that has happened is until the legality is determined, the travel ban is on for people from these mostly Middle Eastern, but a couple of other countries as well, North Korea and Venezuela. Now, it is true that to grant a preliminary injunction, you do need to consider the likelihood of success of the law eventually. But by saying that we are stopping the injunction, the Supreme Court has said nothing more than we have no idea what the result of the legal challenges will be. Some legal experts are saying that this decision suggests that when the specific legal challenges end up back at the Supreme Court, which in all likelihood they will, the Supreme Court will rule in favor of the Trump administration. I say let's wait and see, because that hasn't happened yet. And on the legality, to major legal arguments, right? Those saying that this is totally legal say simply the president has full authority to regulate immigration however he wants, period. That's one side of this argument. The counter argument is, well, hold on. It is illegal to discriminate on the basis of nationality when issuing visas, and that is exactly what Donald Trump's travel ban would do. And we do have, I mean, I'm against the travel ban politically. I'm against the travel ban from a national security standpoint, because the countries on the list are not the countries that have actually sent people to commit attacks in the United States. I have a long list of reasons why I'm against it, but there does appear to be a conflicting legal basis for what ultimately is going to probably be decided by the Supreme Court. We do not know what will happen yet, but it's very funny how if you go just by the headlines, you might think, wow, victory. The travel ban is on, it's legal. No, it's just on for right now until the legality is sorted out.
Maybe you can call it a temporary victory for the Trump administration, and who knows how this will turn out. I mean, my sense is that it is well within the purview of the president. Doesn't mean it's good policy, but we'll have to wait and see.
You think it will be found legal eventually?
I think so.
I wish I could say with more confidence that it would ultimately be found illegal, but I do, like I said, there is case law, there is U.S. law, statutory law, on both sides of this, and it could be a while until we figure it out. And in the background, remember, the entire thing was supposed to be a temporary 90-day ban.
Well, I think the first one was. But this is like the third travel ban, which was indefinite.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, that at least explains. I wonder if we figured out by now what the hell is going on, though, because that was not meant to be indefinite, no doubt about it. Okay. So not really the victory that right-wing media has been touting this to be. Let's talk a little bit about Donald Trump's personal finances for a moment. So we've got the Trump-Russia investigation that is going on. And sort of the catalyst for that investigation is, was there collusion, which could include a number of different possible crimes, between a non-friendly foreign power, namely Russia, and the Donald Trump administration? That was the initial catalyst for Robert Mueller's special prosecutor investigation that is ongoing right now. But there are a couple of other directions that the investigation could go and arguably has started to go. One is, well, are there crimes in terms of the cover-up around possible collusion? That is, we hear that all the time, right? It's not the crime, it's the cover-up. That's one direction. The other possible direction that the Robert Mueller investigation could go in is a focus on financial crimes. And we had a sense that that might be going on because for some time now, Robert Mueller has been hiring a number of prosecutors who are experts in prosecuting financial crimes, investigating financial crimes. So there was already a sense that that's a direction that it could be going. Now, I want to remind you that Donald Trump was asked about, well, what if Robert Mueller starts going in the direction of looking into your personal finances? And before I tell you what's happening now, because hint, it's happening, I want to remind you that when Donald Trump was interviewed by the New York Times back in July of this year, he was asked, if that were to happen, if Robert Mueller started looking into you and your family's personal finances, would that cross a sort of red line? And Donald Trump said that it would. And here's the transcript from that interview with the New York Times, where Donald Trump was sitting in this interview, and one of the journalists, Schmidt, said, last thing, if Mueller was looking at your finances and your family finances unrelated to Russia, is that a red line? And Maggie Haberman added, would that be a breach of what his actual charge is? And Donald Trump said pretty clearly, I would say, yeah, I would say yes. By the way, I would say, I mean, it's possible there's a condo or something. So, you know, I sell a lot of condo units and somebody from Russia buys a condo. Who knows? I don't make money from Russia. Trump going on. But the point there is that Trump said, yes, if Robert Mueller did start looking into my family's finances, it would cross a proverbial red line. Well, it's happening. Donald Trump's personal banking information is now in the hands of Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller. This continues to suggest that this is increasingly a financial crimes investigation. Donald Trump's biggest lender for his business, as of late anyway, has been Deutsche Bank, a German bank. And they've now been forced to turn over documents about their relationship with Donald Trump after being subpoenaed by Robert Mueller's investigation. Now, the right is going to downplay this, but this is huge in either of two scenarios. This could mean one of two different things, and both of them mean a lot. Scenario one is that the Deutsche Bank documents are related to Russia stuff specifically. That would be big in and of itself because it would mean, hey, that Russian interactions are wide-reaching enough to involve German banks. So if this is related directly to Russia specifically, that would be news in and of itself. But think about the other side. If the Deutsche Bank stuff has nothing to do with Russia specifically, that's also huge because it would confirm that indeed Donald Trump's personal finances are a growing area of concern for the Mueller team. We've already had 4 indictments. And if at this time Robert Mueller continues to subpoena financial documents that don't have to do with Russia, that tells us that there is a lot here that is not even directly related to Russia. And of course, it is fully within Robert Mueller's purview to investigate any possible crimes that his team learns about the possibility of through their initial investigation. That's how these special prosecutors work. Now, what will Donald Trump do? Well, again, Trump said if Mueller does this, it would be crossing a red line. I would say, yeah, is what Donald Trump said. I hope that Donald Trump is reinvigorated in his thought about firing Robert Mueller, because that would be absolutely monumental at this point, and very interesting that it's not been a good 24 to 36 hours for Donald Trump. And after tweeting yesterday morning, Monday morning, Trump has been silent on Twitter. Constant news breaking over the last 24 hours. And at least as of 15 minutes ago, when I looked at Donald Trump's Twitter account, we heard nothing from him, which is not really like Trump, and to me suggests The guy is clearly worried here.
I mean, maybe he is learning his lesson, but maybe he also will find this as justification to fire Robert Mueller.
Maybe
now
so.
He's looking at my personal finances. I don't like this.
It's starting to seem almost like the president himself might be under investigation. Oh, wait a second. We knew that. We knew that. Although Trump and his cronies have been trying to deny that Trump is personally under investigation, it's clear that Trump is personally under investigation, period. And then what's going to be the next defense? Donald Trump had a very minor role in the campaign and in the administration. He was just a figurehead. He wasn't really responsible for anything. It was actually Jared Kushner who was really running things, and Steve Bannon when he was around. He knew nothing, and he was kept out of the loop. It is becoming more and more difficult to separate. Right now, and I know Alex Mohajer yesterday said he doesn't believe that Pence is separate from any of this stuff, because if he was the one being lied to by Flynn, clearly the series of events suggests Pence was involved. I don't know that I agree with Alex. I think Pence is increasingly the only one where there's any plausible deniability about what he knew.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there is any evidence, and there really isn't too much speculation about Mike Pence either. Maybe
not that many people are talking about it
at this point.
At this point, I think is the key thing. And I would actually add a caveat to that. I would say, from the point of view of what's known in the public record, it appears as though Mike Pence's name is clear as of right now. But my suspicion is that Mike Pence actually does know more than what's being discussed. And that is ultimately what the future of the United States presidency could hinge on, right? Because if this continues to grow and eventually we have, I don't know, impeachment, resignation, who knows what, one of the key questions is going to become, do we all just accept that Mike Pence was in no way involved and he becomes clean and clear the next president of the United States? Or do we look at Pence being implicated in this as well?
Right. But from a policy perspective, I don't know that it matters that much.
No, I don't think so.
Mike Pence and Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, who would become the president in that case, cut from the same cloth.
Very similar. I don't know if you would agree. I think Paul Ryan is a little bit less of an ideological religious extremist than Mike Pence. But certainly when it comes to fiscal stuff, absolutely cut from the same cloth. Send me your thoughts. That's the latest that we've learned. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Mike Hirabayashi. Mike, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. We are viewer and listener supported media, and we do depend on your support. So please consider becoming a member. Lots of great perks, including the bonus show, the commercial-free all access program, stories yesterday on the bonus show from my trip to rural northern evangelical Indiana. A lot of people liking those stories. That's on yesterday's bonus show. You'll get instant access as a member, davidpakman.com/membership. Coupon code is available. I voted 17. You can also get access to the bonus show by making a Patreon contribution at patreon.com/davidpakmanshow. And lastly, calendars, 2018 calendars now available for free with memberships if, and this is an important if, you get the membership at davidpakman.com/calendar18. Let's talk about obstruction of justice. There has been a growing focus when we talk about Donald Trump and the Trump-Russia investigation on whether or not Donald Trump may have obstructed justice. We learned that Donald Trump knew back in January of 2017 that Michael Flynn had misled the FBI and lied to Mike Pence. And then he tried to get the investigation shut down by James Comey. He wanted James Comey to end the investigation. We have learned that Donald Trump contacted multiple Republican senators over the summer to get the investigation shut down. And as much as the Russia collusion itself is a matter of discussion, obstruction of justice, which we could call generally kind of part of the cover-up, is also a big matter. And John Dowd is one of Donald Trump's lawyers, and he had a sort of Richard Nixon moment where he told Mike Allen of Axios that the president simply cannot be guilty of obstruction of justice. John Dowd saying, quote, "The president cannot obstruct justice because he is the chief law enforcement officer under the Constitution's Article 2 and has every right to express his view of any case." When I read this, I thought this is the 2017 version of this now infamous quote from President Richard Nixon.
Well, when the president does it, that means that it is not illegal.
This is an if the president does it, it's not illegal argument, plain and simple. Now, Trump's attorney, John Dowd, is saying, while we believe that the president cannot obstruct justice, that is not our defense. We still, of course, don't believe that he did. But, by the way, don't waste your time because we believe that the president cannot obstruct justice. This is another way of saying, I'm above the law. I'm above the law, period. And there are two questions here. Number one, is John Dowd correct? And number two, why does this matter? Let's take the second part first. Why is this huge? This is huge because the goalposts keep moving, right? First, there will be no investigation. Then it's okay, fine. An investigation has started, but it's going to find nothing. And then it's okay. The investigation did lead to some indictments, but they're not related to anything Trump did or knew about. The goalposts keep moving. Here's another example. At first it was, of course there's no collusion. And then it became collusion wouldn't necessarily be illegal. And with obstruction of justice, the goalpost moving is, it used to be obstruction of justice, no way, no how, put it out of your mind. And now the conversation has shifted to, even if the president obstructed justice, the president can't actually be charged with that because they are president of the United States. That's a new conversation where the goalposts have been moved so far that they're in the locker room or the parking lot of the stadium. Arguing that you couldn't possibly be charged with obstruction of justice is not a strong position, it's a weak position. Now to the first part. Could a president be charged with obstruction? Differing opinions about this. When you look at the articles of impeachment filed against Richard Nixon, they started by saying that Nixon obstructed and impeded the administration of justice. Bob Woodward believes that this is not really a settled issue, but said that realistically, the only actual path forward for Trump's removal would be impeachment or resignation, and that you certainly shouldn't be counting on getting the president on criminal obstruction of justice charges. But remember, Bill Clinton was impeached for perjury and obstruction of justice. And what are we coming to? We're coming to endless and far-reaching investigations of everyone at every level here, because it's not just Trump. We learned about K.T. McFarland. We learned about Jeff Sessions. We learned about Mike Flynn and Jared Kushner and Pence. The Republican Party held years of hearings over Benghazi for Hillary Clinton. They impeached Bill Clinton for lying about oral sex. They flipped out when Obama wore a tan suit, and they just want this to go away. So what we need to do is to continue talking about everything else that's going on in politics, net neutrality, tax cuts, healthcare, everything. But we can't let this go away. This is growing to be one of the biggest scandals in the history of American presidencies. Already 4 indictments, 3 investigations, and a revolving door of personal lawyers for Donald Trump trying to keep him out of harm's way. We cannot let it go away. And interestingly, we also need to call out the insane flip-flops and hypocrisies from Republicans on this issue of whether a president can obstruct justice. And that's why I want to talk to you about Jeff Sessions next. We heard from Donald Trump's latest attorney, Mr. John Dowd, who said in a sort of Richard Nixon-like moment, the president cannot obstruct justice, period. Well, if the president can't obstruct justice, that means that a Republican president can't obstruct justice and a Democratic president can't obstruct justice, right? Wrong. Not really. I think you're going to like this one. Back in 1999, current Attorney General Jeff Sessions was not yet Attorney General. He was a mere ideologically extreme Republican senator. And he was involved in trying to remove President Bill Clinton from office for obstruction of justice. Here is Jeff Sessions from the congressional record as senator during the impeachment hearings of President Bill Clinton. The facts are disturbing and compelling on the president's intent to obstruct justice. The chief law officer of the land, whose oath of office calls on him to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, crossed the line and failed to defend the law, and in fact attacked the law and the rights of a fellow citizen. Under our Constitution, equal justice requires that he forfeit his office. Oops, I guess the president can obstruct justice, at least when it's a Democrat named Bill Clinton in the 1990s. Now, what would Jeff Sessions say if you asked him about this now? I don't know. He wouldn't remember. He'd probably take 60 seconds to tell us that I do not recall saying that, Senator, but I would like time to review the congressional record.
You should be on Saturday Night Live.
And submit my response in writing at a time at which we have all forgotten that I ever promised to answer this question later in writing. But here's the thing. It's not just Jeff Sessions, right? There are dozens of current Republican elected officials who, when it was Bill Clinton, they were very clear. The president can obstruct justice. And that's what gets us to the bottom line. That's why we need to vote them out in 2018 and in 2020. Because Republicans, Pat, care more in 2017 right now. They care more about Bill Clinton lying about oral sex in the 1990s than they care about Donald Trump potentially committing a variety of crimes, possibly colluding with a hostile foreign nation over the last year. These are their values. We are seeing every single day how backwards the priorities are. Look at the Alabama Senate race, right? The Republicans are more concerned about keeping a Democrat out of being senator from Alabama than they are concerned about voting for the guy who is an accused serial sex assaulter, including of underage girls. This is the priority.
Yeah, and I mean, some things age well, like a fine wine, perhaps.
Sure.
Cheeses, I hear.
Not that you would know. But
not that I would know. Maybe a nice pair of jeans. But these comments from Jeff Sessions did not age very well.
Here's a tip. If in a conversation about the Trump administration, politicians and pundits start talking about Monica Lewinsky, that's a red flag that they are off the rails. Any reference in 2017 when talking about the current administration to what Bill Clinton did 20 years ago is a deliberate partisan distraction, and you need to not fall for it because it is just not relevant. There's a deluge of stories at this point about Donald Trump and Russia and the insanity that took place, and hopefully we're someday going to learn about it, but I want to sort of set it up for you here because there's been some very interesting revelations about who knew what and when that surfaced over the last 24 to 48 hours. We know now, widely reported. We know. I don't even know what I mean by we know now. Michael Flynn has been indicted. He lied to the FBI in the Russia investigation. We know that Michael Flynn had numerous contacts with Russians. And a big question that we still have not really gotten an answer to is, did Michael Flynn act on his own, or was he directed by the Trump administration to make these contacts with Russians? And there's another question, which is, even if he had acted on his own, how aware was Donald Trump about what Michael Flynn was doing? How aware was the rest of his team about what Michael Flynn was doing? The New York Times has a great report about this, which points out that if you look at recently released emails about this, combined with interview transcripts and court documents that are part of Michael Flynn's indictment, it becomes more and more difficult to come away believing that this was Michael Flynn acting alone, because we now have an email written by Donald Trump transition advisor KT McFarland on December 29th of 2016. She wrote that Obama's sanctions against Russia would be bad for the Trump administration and that Russia, quote, has just thrown the USA election to him being Donald Trump. Now, any reasonable person, most of the people in our audience, Pat, maybe Pat, certainly me for sure, if we read this, we say, it's very clear that KT McFarland is writing that it is an undeniable reality that Russia has helped Donald Trump in the election. Now, the White House, there was a White House lawyer asked to comment on this, and the White House attorney said, no. What KT McFarland meant is that Democrats are saying that Russia helped Trump. She's not actually saying that Russia helped Trump. Well, it certainly doesn't seem that way from what's been released. That is a very weird explanation, but we don't have to wonder and speculate. We have a screenshot of KT McFarland's email, which I have up on the screen for you. And she says very clearly, my take, Obama is doing three things politically. The third of which is box Trump in diplomatically with Russia. If there is a tit-for-tat escalation, Trump will have difficulty improving relations with Russia, which has just thrown USA election to him. There is nothing there that suggests that just this one piece of bullet point number 3 that KT McFarland wrote is her saying, this is the Democratic portrayal. It is her saying it, period. And the released emails also show that as soon as President Obama moved to kick 35 Russian diplomats out of the United States as punishment for Russian interference in the election, the concern of Trump's advisors was, how do we smooth this over with Russia? The top priority when Mr. Obama said we're going to kick out these diplomats was, we've got to smooth over our relationship with Russia because Russia's not going to like this. In another email, KT McFarland wrote that Michael Flynn would be speaking with Sergei Kislyak, the Russian ambassador. So already the idea that only Michael Flynn was operating inside this bubble, it's impossible, right? KT McFarland knew. She was emailing others about it. If only Michael Flynn knew, you wouldn't have emails from KT McFarland to third parties talking about Flynn meeting with Russians. And the list of those who say, who are listed as being looped into what was going on include former Press Secretary Sean Spicer, former Chief of Staff Reince Priebus, former Chief Propagandist, or as he called himself, Advisor Steve Bannon. These people all were in the loop. So the part at which we move from possible obstruction of justice to possible criminal conspiracy is when we undeniably confirm that all these people knew and they were immediately working on the removal of Russian sanctions as soon as Donald Trump's inauguration took place, which we learned that they were doing. Poetic justice, could we say poetic justice or irony? I don't know what to call it. Michael Flynn spoke at the RNC and led a chant of lock her up, referring to Hillary Clinton. He's since been indicted and pleaded guilty. Donald Trump has been obsessed with Hillary's emails for years, and it might be emails that end up bringing him down.
Yeah, or Obama warned Trump not to hire Michael Flynn. That's the ultimate irony, too.
That is the ultimate irony, which is if Donald Trump wasn't so ideologically committed to not doing anything President Obama suggested, he might have taken Obama's advice and not hired Michael Flynn to begin with. Discuss this with us on our subreddit at davidpakman.com/REDDIT.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by attorney Scott Oswald, who represents employees, has litigated nearly 50 trials to verdict, and we're going to be talking today about some different elements related to the recent string of sexual harassment and sexual assault allegations that we've seen. So first, speaking very generally, Scott, and it's really great to have you, when we talk very generally about the term sexual harassment or sexual assault, not everything that falls under that umbrella is necessarily criminal. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, certainly any kind of offensive touching most certainly would be in most jurisdictions, but you know, the kinds of things that we see in the workplace all the time, things like boorish behavior, jokes that are sexually tinged, that can be a violation of our employment laws, and certainly for employers create real problems potentially when unchecked.
So when we talk about what is potentially criminal and what is not, and how employees who, at least in the workplace, are being targeted or victims of this type of behavior or actions, what's important for employees to know? When potentially am I supposed to be talking to the police, and when are these sort of more human resource matters that need to be dealt with?
Yeah, I think if we wanted to draw a bright line, and it's not always easy to do so, I think we certainly can start with touching. Anytime there is physical touching that is offensive, and certainly if it is with some kind of sexual proposition, that is out of bounds. And in most cases, if it is unwanted, that may be something that would require outside examination, including, potentially a criminal charge. I think we can use our common sense too. Anything where there's a sexual assault, as an example, that certainly would warrant potential criminal involvement and law enforcement involvement. Other kinds of things in the workplace, it's always a good idea to notify the company, because a company has an obligation, David, to actually create a safe and healthful workplace. And if they don't do so, that company can be liable. So it's always a good thing to notify the company right away if you think that something has happened in the workplace that you think just isn't quite right.
Can you talk a little bit about how power dynamics influences how a lot of these incidents are dealt with by employers? Because we can all imagine a situation where if there is a C-level executive, for example, or someone that is sort of above human resources in the organizational chart who is maybe engaging in some of this behavior, we can all imagine how going to human resources is not necessarily going to be an experience where human resources will be an unbiased arbiter of what took place if they also are subject to those exact same power dynamics. So can you address how that might be managed in some way?
Well, first off, to begin with, that's a bad system. I mean, anytime human resources is reporting into a person or persons that they then have to investigate, I mean, that's just a recipe for impotence. And in societies like the Society of Human Resource Management, other employer organizations, they have systems that they recommend that employers institute, where you can report, for instance, outside human resources or maybe anonymously to the board directly when you feel as if human resources is influenced inappropriately by someone above them that might be involved in the harassment. But I think generally the first place to go is human resources, and the reason I say that, David, is that the law says that. Our Supreme Court has said that when an employee notifies his or her human resources department and does so promptly and does so in a specific way, the law then will protect them. The key, though, is to make sure people in the company are aware of what's going on and doing so as soon as you possibly can.
We know from experience that there is a degree of stigma in society about coming forward and saying, I was a victim of X, Y, or Z. Can you talk a little bit about, from a legal standpoint, how statutes of limitations can actually create an issue when there is a delay in coming forward, but also about ways in which it doesn't matter, in which claims are just as valid later than they would be immediately after an alleged incident?
I think it's really important, because there is this stigma, I think, out there, this sense that, if I'm coming forward, I necessarily am a victim. I'm the one who should be blamed. And I think it should be just the opposite. The reality is that in the employment space in particular, we all ought to be on equal footing. And certainly we all ought to expect from our employers that employer is going to create that safe space for us. I mean, the law requires that. And so there is nothing wrong about coming forward. And I think it's an employer's obligation to make that very clear to its employees. So how does an employer do that? I think the best way is really in training. The employers that routinely train their employees, and I'm not talking about just some sort of online module where you go in, you check some boxes, but real training where you bring employees in and you explain to them the importance of coming forward and notifying the company so the company can do something about bad actors. And create that safe space, and to make it very clear to employees that the company will take any complaint seriously, will move quickly to investigate, and will take prompt corrective action, will potentially remove that employee that's been a sexual harasser, as an example from the workspace. So it really is the company's obligation to remove that stigma, to make employees feel as if they come forward, they're going to be lauded, and they're going to be listened to and not retaliated against.
So that certainly tells us about how the employer can manage circumstances when there sort of have been allegations, or to create an environment where people are comfortable coming forward and saying, hey, here's what happened. I got a call from one of our viewers last week saying something along the lines of, hey, how can employers prevent sexual harassment in the first place? And I think that that's difficult. I mean, my reaction was, if by the time you're an adult and you get hired somewhere, you don't yet know that it's not okay to do these things, I don't know how much an employer can really do. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So the first thing is to make sure that the people you let in the door know those things. Background checks, careful review of references. What we're seeing, I think, in each one of these instances in the media is that these are not one-off situations. These are men that seem to do this over and over and over again. And so they develop a reputation. And if an employer does its job in vetting employees at the outset, especially senior people that they're bringing in, to make sure that they are not individuals who have a track record for doing these types of things, I think that's critical.
How do you do that, though? Because presumably, I mean, I'm just thinking through, like, okay, you check references very carefully. You can't necessarily go and talk to people that were managed by your applicant, right? Because more than likely, their references are either colleagues or people even senior to them, or in C-level cases, maybe even boards of directors. How can you get access to, I guess, the people who might actually know or be willing to talk about that prior track record?
So I think the first place is those previous employers, and what we're seeing is employers know a lot more about some of these people than maybe they let on at the outset. So getting releases from prospective employees and saying, look, we are going to contact your former employers and we're going to ask lots of questions. That kind of careful review of the person's background at least puts us in a position that if it's known to a previous employer, that you're going to uncover it. And, even in situations where a former employer is reluctant maybe to go into all the details, they're going to send you signals. For instance, you might ask, would you hire this person again? Would you rehire Mr. X in a position of trust? And if you don't get the right answer, that's someone that you need to stay away from, as an example. So I think it all begins first in a thorough vetting of people that you're bringing into your organization, into your safe space. The second, I think, component of this is that you're right, David. I mean, clearly some people have not been they haven't had a proper upbringing in terms of what is okay and what is not. And so some people need to be taught. I mean, just like you bring people in and you teach them about your IT systems, you teach them about your culture in the company, you teach them what is right and what is wrong. And in particular, what is wrong in the workplace when dealing with your colleagues, what kinds of interactions you can and what kind of interactions you shouldn't have. Making sure that you're not putting your employees in a position where they're vulnerable. When you are sending your employees off-site, as an example, let's say for travel, having very clear guidelines of what people should and should not do when they're on travel. For instance, we're seeing in the news, as an example, some people coming forward and saying, look, this is what happened to me when I was on travel with this person. If there had been clear rules, guidelines, the do's and don'ts when you're away from the office, maybe those things wouldn't have happened in the first instance. So I think that the onus really is on the employer to set those guidelines, to make sure that they're not having company events that are going late into the night where there is alcohol being served, as an example. These kinds of things. You take a few of these steps to ensure that your people are continue to be in safe spaces, then the chances that you're going to have people who will slip is much reduced.
We've been speaking with attorney Scott Oswald. He is an attorney who represents employees. He's also managing principal of the Employment Law Group. A very important and timely topic. Scott, thanks so much for talking to us about it.
Hey, David, you're welcome. It is my pleasure.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
All right, some of you know a friend of the David Pakman Show, Sam Seder. He hosts the Majority Report, formerly of Air America. He's a voice, or maybe even multiple voices at this point, on the cartoon Bob's Burgers, and an MSNBC contributor. And some of you might also be aware of this right-wing alt-right troll named Mike Cernovich, who himself has been accused of rape. Well, Cernovich found an old tweet of Sam's. This is a clearly satirical tweet, and that we're going to show you the tweet. And Cernovich started making a huge deal out of it. And the alt-right followers of his went completely bonkers, demanding that Sam be fired from his MSNBC contributorship. They started lobbying Sam's advertisers to cancel their advertising. Many of the same advertisers that we have on the show, because Sam and I both work with the same advertising agency. And the tweet, which we're going to show you, relates to Roman Polanski. Roman Polanski is this film director who was arrested and charged in the 70s with raping a 13-year-old girl, ended up taking a plea bargain for lesser charges, but then he fled the United States. Even with the lesser charges, he was facing jail time. He fled the U.S. and has been living in Europe ever since. And years ago, in 2009, Sam tweeted about that issue, quote, "I don't care regarding Polanski, but I hope if my daughter is ever raped, it is by an older, truly talented man with a great sense of mise en scène," the film term referring to sort of the a composition of a scene on camera. Well, no big deal, right? Because I'm sure every alt-right free speech keyboard warrior is going to be out there defending Sam Seder to the death, because after all, it's clearly a joke and they're not triggered. They're not the PC police or any of the stuff that they criticize the left for. Not exactly. Mike Cernovich uncovered this tweet, and he tweeted, "Hi, Chris Hayes. Care to comment on this tweet by your colleague, Sam Seder?" Now, you could say you can never joke about rape, right? You could take some kind of absolutist position, and if you want to do that, go ahead and do it. But the people complaining about Sam's tweet are not the people who take those absolutist positions that they usually ascribe to those on the left. Talk about, some people are saying that this is a defense of pedophilia that Sam did by making a joke about Roman Polanski. Anybody really think that? Does anybody think Sam Seder was defending pedophilia? Put aside for a moment that every other time that Sam commented on Roman Polanski, it was absolutely and obviously critical of the disgusting acts that Roman Polanski was accused of. This is obvious satire, right? And the hypocrisies are stunning and multiple. Number one, you have these alt-right trolls who claim to be against outrage culture, but yet they went to MSNBC and to Sam Seder's advertisers saying, "We're outraged over a clearly satirical 8-year-old tweet." That's hypocrisy number one. Now, hypocrisy number two is about Mike Cernovich, and it's not the hypocrisy that Mike Cernovich himself was accused of actual rape, and ultimately that charge was reduced to misdemeanor battery. But forget about that, right? In his own 2015 book, this guy Mike Cernovich said he believes date rape is a liberal fiction. What is more outrageous, Sam's obvious satirical tweet from 8 years ago, or someone saying there is no such thing as date rape? Cernovich also wrote in 2012 that date rape does not exist. And the same people claiming to be outraged over Sam's tweet seem not to care about what Mike Cernovich himself has said over the years about rape. They seem not to care that our president was accused of actual sexual assault by more than a dozen women, that the guy running for Senate in Alabama was accused of actual sexual assault by half a dozen women, some of whom were under the age of consent at the time of the alleged incidents. How can anyone be so concerned about a 2009 joke from Sam Seder and yet not be activists against Donald Trump and Roy Moore? The group supposedly against political correctness and against the policing of speech is policing speech by going after someone accused of doing nothing other than making a joke that at worst was, I don't know, insensitive to some degree. In any case, MSNBC is cutting off ties with Sam. Strictly speaking, they're not firing him, but they are saying he's not scheduled to be back on before February, which is when his contract ends, and we're not going to be renewing that contract. And my issue is not so much that MSNBC fired Sam, or call it what you want, won't be renewing his contract. That's what these corporations do in these situations. It's the hypocrisy of the lynch mob that made this an issue in the first place. And Sam's real mistake here, if there was one, is deleting the tweet in question. And he said on his program that if he could go back, he wouldn't have deleted the tweet. I understand the reaction. This starts blowing up. People are attacking your livelihood. And you say, what can I do? I'll delete the tweet, which, as we learned from Donald Trump deleting tweets and whoever else, they don't really go away. I do believe that Sam will ultimately persevere here, but just absolutely and totally pathetic. Let's talk about Sarah Huckabee Sanders. As you know, if you've been watching or listening to the show lately, our president has been on a rampage against his own FBI, currently led by his selection to be director of the FBI, Chris Wray, saying that the reputation of the FBI is in tatters, that it's just terrible. James Comey is terrible. Robert Mueller is terrible. He's on a witch hunt. They're dishonest. They're phony. It's all horrible. Back in November of 2016, in fact, just a few days before the presidential election, press secretary, well, then she wasn't press secretary, now press secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders, tweeted something very interesting. She tweeted something that is now going viral when she said, when you're attacking FBI agents because you're under criminal investigation, you're losing. I tweeted her and I said, hey, Sarah, do you stand by this? No answer so far. And maybe she'll be asked about it at today's press briefing. And I'm sure her answer will be something like, well, that's because Hillary was engaging in criminal activity, but this is just a witch hunt by the FBI of the President of the United States. It's not a double standard. Next question. Or, look, I find this question to be disgusting and offensive. That's another one of her go-tos. And for someone who's part of this anti-PC, anti-outrage culture brigade, it's funny how frequently Sarah Huckabee Sanders just finds questions offensive. And this really gets to my total disgust with Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Sean Spicer, the former press secretary, it was stunning how brazenly Sean Spicer was willing to lie. But I had the sense that like 2% of him maybe was sort of feeling bad about the brazen nature of the lies he was telling.
He was endearing in a certain way, wasn't he?
Yeah, there was some element of like, man, I kind of feel bad for the guy because, yes, he's a fool for agreeing to do this stuff, but something about him made me feel like a 1% ounce of sympathy for him. And maybe that was wrong. I feel none of that for Sarah Huckabee Sanders. I feel absolutely none of it because she transmits almost like a love and enjoyment of going out there and lying. She seems to have this visceral contempt for the press and so-called educated liberal elites. I get the impression, Pat, that she relishes going out there and just lying.
I mean, it's a tough job. Not many people can do it, especially for this administration.
Yeah.
She does decently well, I would have to say. I mean, given the circumstances, right?
I mean, I don't know how we even, by whatever 6 standards we have to apply to analyze her job performance, you're not wrong that we could say she kind of does it well, yeah.
You know, it's okay to be critical of the president every now and then, too. I mean, I know you're speaking from his platform, right?
Yes.
You're the mouthpiece of the president.
Officially.
But, you know, you can craft it in a certain way that it doesn't sound so bad.
He can do no wrong. I mean, there's just any question that goes to something that Trump clearly just messed up on, it's an offensive question, it's a bad question, or another clever line from her is, I've already answered that. And there's actually no shortage of sort of these hilarious old FBI-related tweets that haven't aged well. I found one from Kellyanne Conway. She tweeted back in October of 2016, most honest people I know are not under FBI investigation, let alone 2. What does that make her boss Donald Trump then? And I hope that history is accurate with these people and identifies them as the charlatans that we know them to be.
I'm just surprised that the Ministry of Truth hasn't wiped this out, right?
Oh, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
They create their own facts in this administration.
They want to replace that tweet with a documentary about the Bowling Green massacre, which at one point pulled Kellyanne Conway off the TV at least. We've got a voicemail number. It's 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a voicemail about the entire sort of MSNBC Sam Seder thing. Take a listen to this.
Hey, David, I was wondering, so I know that you're pals with a lot of people on MSNBC, people like Chris Hayes and Sam Seder, and you've also spoken favorably about Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski, and yeah, so surely you know that MSNBC is just the propaganda arm of the DNC, right? I mean, I'm sure you know that. Please tell me you don't like that program and that you don't get your information from that program, because that stuff is just straight corporate garbage. Yeah, bye.
I don't know where this guy is getting this stuff. The only person I'm friends with at MSNBC is Sam Seder, who's marginally an MSNBC contributor and no longer because they're not renewing his contract. I've never exchanged even a single word or tweet with Chris Hayes.
Really?
Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski, when have I been praising them? I've said sometimes that they were right about something they said.
Yeah, maybe defending them against Donald Trump calling Joe Crazy Joe.
Or calling him a murderer or whatever else.
Yeah,
I don't know where this guy's getting this stuff. And I've been very clear that MSNBC and Fox News are both corporate media stations which have made different editorial decisions, full stop. I don't know. Maybe you've got me confused with someone else. Maybe Kyle Kulinski or Cenk Uygur. I have no idea who you think I am, because I didn't say any of that stuff. And I don't know any of these people. And quite frankly, I don't know that they'd even respond to me if I tweeted to them. That's how low I am, I think, on the list of priorities for Chris Hayes and Joe Scarborough or whoever
I bet
else.
they know who you are.
You think?
I think so.
Be interesting to hear about that. We've got a great bonus show for you today, but what I don't have time for is time to tell you what's on the bonus show. But trust me, folks, it's a good one today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.